Then There's California, a podcast featuring members of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus in conversation about their lives, their legislative priorities, policies, and other related issues that help make California exceptional. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Going to start this episode off with a little bit of poetry from Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I'll rise. And those powerful words make up the first stanza of African-American poet Maya Angelou's stirring verse called Still I Rise. Written by Ms. Angelou in the 1970s, Still I Rise, depending on who you look to for interpretation, celebrates the resiliency of the human spirit in the wake of generations of racial and cultural oppression in the African-American community, overcoming that oppression with grace and pride, with not even skin color holding you back. Here in the U.S. and California, in the third decade of this new century, our society is still confronted and confounded with a crisis of racial and cultural oppression, a crisis of employment, wage disparities, justice, income, and quality of life disparities that echo especially deep in our African-American communities. The hardships, violations, and accusations have shadowed Black communities for centuries, and it's still prevalent today, disproportionately so for Black women. What is also prevalent today, thankfully, is a growing effort in our cities, within our state houses, from the drawing boards of our NGOs to the selfless work of volunteers and advocates, to uplift from the bottom our communities of color, to secure well-paying jobs and job security for Black workers, and raise the standards of living and quality of life for those workers and their families, most especially Black women. So the focus of the effort has been most especially prominent in the last several years in the training and encouragement of Black women to organize, to rally, to secure those well-paying jobs, to uplift their confidence, and to help them rise. And on this edition of Then There's California, as we segue from our celebration of Black History Month in February into commemorations of Women's History Month in March, we'll get to know another one of our sterling class of freshman 2023 lawmakers, who throughout her career has been the vanguard of a national movement to address racial and economic inequality by connecting the organizing proficiency of Black women and the broader African-American community to improve the lives of all working people. Freshman Senator Lola Smallwood-Cuevas represents the newly configured 28th Senate District in Los Angeles County, representing Culver City on the west side, portions of downtown Los Angeles, and South L.A. Before being elected to the Senate in December, Senator Smallwood-Cuevas was a director of the UCLA Labor Center, the former director of the Los Angeles Black Worker Center, and a political and community coordinator for the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, Local 1877. Senator Smallwood-Cuevas is a self-described daughter of labor, the daughter of a single teenage mom, a home care worker who had to put her livelihood ahead of her parenthood by working 2 jobs and putting herself through school in order to support and uplift her young daughter. So, Senator Smallwood-Cuevas knows firsthand what a good job can do for a family, but also about the tremendous sacrifices a family breadwinner has to make to provide that support. Senator Smallwood-Cuevas, welcome to Then There's California.
Wow, Brian, thank you so much. I am so honored to be here with you. And from the beginning of that introduction with our elder and a phenomenal ancestor, Maya Angelou,
I love
to
her.
that analysis of community and who's leading in our communities and why, it's just so beautiful and so rich. And just us being here together, you know, a Gen X, a boomer, a Black woman,
Yeah.
you know.
That's right.
Where are you from, Brian?
I'm from California, born and raised, northern, southern, central, you name it. Yeah.
And that we're sharing this experience and stories and lifting up the richness of our lived experience. And even though we come from very different places, I think we can relate to those experiences of how hard our parents worked and
Absolutely.
the contributions that they made. So
Absolutely.
it's just wonderful to be here with you.
Thank you for opening this podcast in a better way than me, actually, with such a positive embracement of this. And you're right, regardless of where our life paths have been, there's a lot of commonalities. Welcome to the Senate, by the way.
Thank you.
How's it going? How's life here in the upper house with the new commute to LA 4 days a week away from the family? How's it going?
It is a whirlwind, but I'm getting my feet underneath me. I joke that, you know, I grew up watching The Twilight Zone, and when you get off at Sacramento, there's like the wavy lines and a portal, and you step into a totally different time dimension. I swear there are 28 hours in the day.
Yeah.
And so it's really trying to do all things at once, like that amazing film that's being lifted up in our API community. That's what it feels like here in Sacramento. We are building the bridge to the future by developing and and advocating for and organizing around important policies that will bring a change to our communities. At the same time, we are building relationships both in the upper house, but also in the assembly. We are building our staff and team. I have an amazing team here in the Capitol and an amazing team in the district. Just had my community swearing in a couple weekends ago. So the transition is happening, and it's a beautiful, beautiful process. So I'm honored to be here representing the diverse constituents of the 28th. They have given me all of the love and support. They said they're in front of me, they're behind me, they're on either side of me.
Wonderful.
So with that kind of support, we're going to weather this transition and be ready to go to battle for the communities that we care about and deserve to have the California that they need.
That's inspiring to hear from a freshman legislator. And I have to say, since the legislature, the new class was sworn in, and we've been talking about the new members and their different personalities and the different work that they're doing, everyone, when you mention the name Lola Smallwood-Cuevas to a person, she is so nice. She is so gracious. And you've certainly proved this with your kindness already this morning. She is such a good and wonderful person. So really, your reputation precedes you here at this microphone.
I appreciate that.
And it actually brings up a question for me, too. Talk about the reputation of being nice. There have been times in this angry, take no prisoners world that we live in that being nice is not always associated with characteristics of leadership or power or authority. So how do you in your life find that sweet spot between being nice and a good person and as somebody perceived also as, as we say, a badass, as somebody, a velvet hammer? I am sweet, I am nice, but don't take that kindness as weakness. How do you balance that?
So I'm so blessed to come from the 28th, and I've had over the last 17, 20 years a relationship with Reverend James Lawson.
Yes.
Who is the architect of the American nonviolence movement, who trained Reverend Dr. King, the freedom riders, the sit-in leaders on our humanity. And to me, nice is not really the term. It's I'm human, and you are human. And in this place, what is profound to me is that people are giving up a lot, their families, their travel, their time. We talked about this different dimension, all to make a difference in the lives of the communities that elected them to be here. And to me, that says a lot. No matter what side of the aisle you're on, no matter what your position, you're here to do good for whatever that is for your community. And as a human being, I respect that. And I hope that you respect me and understand that I'm here for the same purpose. And part of our democracy is about the exchange of ideas. It's about our seeing the humanity, seeing the ideas that are coming from that humanity and wrestling and struggling with it. It's okay to struggle. If we aren't struggling, we're not doing something right. When we struggle together, we're getting to the real fix. So don't perceive or take my niceness for weakness. Take it for the strength of my humanity. And that's what I lead with. I believe that we are not here to tear each other down. We're here to build our state up, and it starts with us. We must envision the world we want to see. And I want to live in a world where we can care for each other and respect each other and be good to each other, but also be fierce advocates for what we see is right and to demand the changes that we want to see in our community. So I have to say, in these first 2 weeks of coming to the Senate in particular, and in the Assembly as well, there's just been such respect, such camaraderie, folks really trying to get at who you are and why you're here so that they can connect on a human level. And I really appreciate that. As we move forward into the deeper discussions, into the real struggle and the battle for ideas and for good policies, I will hold on to that. And I'm expecting everyone else will hold on to their humanity in the process. And we will fight with our coalitions, with our ideas, and we're here to make a change. So that's my position. I have witnessed the power of soul force. That's what Dr. King and Reverend Lawson talked about, that power that we have, that divinity that we have to make significant transformative change. I talk about being the daughter of the labor movement. I'm a child of the civil rights movement. I'm a product of the civil rights movement. So I know when we operate out of humanity and we weaponize our love and care for our society, for our country, for the communities that we come from, that we will reach higher ground. We always have, in the most transformative times, have been when folks operated out of that humanity and dignity and respect. And that's where I come from, and that's how I plan to lead.
Well, you are part of that humanity and that transformation and that dignity here in the legislature and in the Senate. You're also part of the diversity, I guess you could say the new diversity here. We've been celebrating since the swearing in December and even on this podcast, this being the most diverse legislature in the state's history. A majority of the legislators are women, people of color, representatives of the LGBTQ community, and listeners of this podcast have heard me talk about this for several episodes. But I think it's important to lift it up and to continue to focus on how the demographics and how the makeup of the legislature is more representative of the communities that they represent. Celebrate with me in that sense. Talk about your role in that diversity as one of those demographics.
I want to celebrate, but I have to tell you, I have to be reserved because I'm still the only Black woman in the California State Senate.
Well, we were going to get to that, but yes.
So in some ways, it's great to see our progress, but it's also important to recognize how much farther we have to go. But I came in with an amazing Senate cohort of women of color, of LGBTQ, AI plus leaders who have phenomenal voice and are coming here out of the roots of their community to make a difference and will legislate around those values. I think that is extremely exciting to see California looking more like itself in our state legislature. I think we have more to do. We have to continue to build pathways. And I think from our Senate staff to our fellowship programs to our internship programs back into these very rich and deeply diverse communities to ensure that we, in fact, achieve what Dr. King called the mountaintop. I think the Women's Caucus is a fine example of how we can be intentional and set goals and build the kind of legislature that truly reflects the diversity of California. It's not easy, and I think as we move into this battle of ideas, the fight for good public policy that puts our state on the right course, the bridge to the future, I think you will see the dynamism of this diversity. It's wonderful to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's another thing to implement it, to make it actionable,
Indeed.
To operationalize it. And I think one thing that as we celebrate diversity, and we talked about this on the floor yesterday in terms of Black History Month, the sentiments are wonderful. Let's hold that as we move into our actions.
Well, in fact, it is difficult, and you brought it up yourself. You are the only African-American woman in the Senate, only one of two African-American lawmakers in the Senate. Your predecessor in this seat, now Congressmember Sidney Kamlager, was also the only African-American woman, as was her predecessor, now LA County Supervisor Holly Mitchell. So there is this challenge of increasing the ranks, so to speak, of more African-Americans, and it's easy to say, well, the solution is just elect more African-Americans to office. But it's not that easy. What is the solution?
So it's a multi-pronged solution, and it's deeply rooted and complex. The right to vote, we're coming years and decades after many communities in just having the right to vote. And then on top of that, decades of voter suppression, ways of gerrymandering, redistricting schemes that have lessened that voice over time. And I think our community, and particularly in the 28th district, what you see is Black voters voting twice their numbers. There has been tremendous work to register voters, tremendous work to create access to voters. There's a bill that I'm supporting now to ensure that men and women who are in prison have the opportunity to participate in their democracy, because that is a right that we all need to ensure that we are able to exercise our vote freely. So I believe that we do have the solution for how we need to do this, and it is a multi-pronged approach. registering our voters, building pathways into opportunities to build the next generation of members, investing in our public policy, schools and programs, reaching those vulnerable voters, and always, always, always having an integrated approach where we aren't just talking to our communities about our democracy 6 and 8 weeks before an election, but that we're doing this year round. Citizenship, the opportunities to vote, these are lessons that we always have to continue to teach because we want to always have that level of participation. I'm so excited about Secretary of State Weber's efforts to increase access to voting by mail, to having voting centers, to going to your poll. We have to build in technology too, as we have a new generation of younger voters who don't know what a stamp is. We have to make sure that they understand how do they really integrate into the democratic process of voting. I was reading recently, there was a New York Times piece by Jamel Bowie that was talking about the African-American experience and the connections to voting. And what he talked about was that our experience is not really about the institution and the technicalities of voting. It's really about how do we build it as a cultural enterprise, of an understanding, of a caring, of ensuring that we are not othering, but that we have each other's back. That has always been how African Americans have seen this enterprise of democracy and voting. And I think that means our work is to really to build a bigger community of folks who understand that and see voting as a way of taking care of one another.
I want to talk about your experience in this institution, your anticipated experience in this institution, and following up a little bit on the exclusivity of being the only African-American woman in the state Senate. In one of my past conversations with then Senator, now Congressmember Sidney Kamlager, we talked about what seemed to be the unique challenges and responsibilities of being an African-American state lawmaker, and she candidly shared at the time about what she called the double-edged sword of being a black female legislator. People call you for certain things, she said, but not for other things. People want you in the room on Monday, but maybe not in the room on Tuesday. And she was struck by the dissonance that comes up when she talked with her legislative colleagues about certain topics or policies that impact the black community. And people will come up with every anecdote and question and suspicion and demand for specificity that they don't ask for with other kinds of bills that are presented perhaps by non-African-American legislators. I'm hoping you, in your relatively short time here already, have not had to address microaggression in your legislative work, but I imagine you've thought about it or have been mentored and counseled about it.
Well, I'm the 6th Black woman elected to the California State Senate, and I'm blessed to know 4 of them personally, who have mentored, who have supported, who've shared the nuggets that they've learned along the way. And like every Black woman, no matter whether she's a home care worker or a janitor or a state senator, operate in microaggressions. And yes, I've had to stand up and defend and protect my humanity as a Black woman already because the microaggressions are real. And some of it, to some of the examples that were shared, are very intentional and explicit, and some of them are implicit and almost unconscious, involuntary, meaning that the lack of knowledge and awareness in some of my colleagues, and particularly white male colleagues, is just not there. And that's where a deep education is required to, one, raise the standard of knowledge of state senators, because we should know as we elect and represent a diverse constituency, but 2, to help to even out the pathway for the women who are going to come behind me. It is painful to have to not just come to the state legislature and deal with the challenges of passing really strong and good legislation, but to have to spend time and energy on battling microaggression and racism on a daily basis in my workplace is also exhausting and tiring. And I've only been here for 8 weeks. So I come from a people who understand resilience practice, who understand that the arc is long, but it does bend toward justice, and I have to keep my eye on the prize. But at the same time, I'm going to educate, I'm going to speak up, I'm going to speak out, and I'm going to bring people with me, because there are communities, and I was so impressed to see the LGBTQ community, the API community, the Jewish community, the women's community, and even some of the Republicans speak up about the contributions and the struggle for Black equity, not just in this state, but in this country. And I'm going to hold those communities to that, as I will stand with them in their fight for justice for themselves as individuals who are from these vulnerable populations that face microaggression and institutionalized racism and overlapping barriers, intersectional challenges every day. I will stand with them, and my expectation is that they will stand with us. Power concedes nothing without a demand. And even though we are here and seated in the seat of power, we still know that there are forces. As I walk through the halls and I see the beautiful oil paintings of California's leaders, these white elite men who don't look like me, I'm reminded that this institution was not designed for me. And therefore, I have to make a way in this institution for myself and for community. So I have not yet experienced all of the things that my predecessor, the amazing Sidney Kamlager, Congresswoman, shared, but she has shared those experiences. And Holly Mitchell, the esteemed supervisor of the 2nd District of LA County, has also shared those experiences. The esteemed mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, who all three endorsed and support me, have all shared. So I know very well what I'm walking into. And as I mentioned before, those amazing leaders are standing in front of me, behind me, and beside me, as are the 6 women, some of them who've gone over to the ancestors' realm. They're with me in the state Senate. And that is my resilience practice, making sure that I make my voice heard and create an opportunity for those folks who are going to come behind me to be able to be respected and treated with dignity while doing the work that we are brought here and elected to do.
Thank you for sharing that profound insight. I know you speak lovingly of your 28th district and the people, the communities. It's a district that represents a lot of Hollywood landmarks. It represents South Los Angeles. It represents downtown Culver City. It is a diversity of wealth, but also economic and racial struggles, cities that are dealing with issues concerning gentrification and community identity, not to mention worries about job security and what their next meal is going to come from. Walk us through your 28th district and the people and the places.
Well, the 28th district is the heart and soul of LA County. And you're right, it is the most diverse economically, racially, ethnically, one of the most diverse districts in the country. And it has, within that diversity, I think just the tremendous opportunity, because it is a microcosm of the state and really of the nation, and the tensions, both the economic tensions, the racial tensions, the tensions with the 20th century and the 21st century, right? In terms of letting go of some of the historical baggage that continue to keep us back in terms of how we're investing our resources, what really keeps our community safe, how do we open up the vault of opportunity and allow those most marginalized to walk through the door. I think this district represents the greatest opportunity of piloting some ideas that help to bring those divergent stratas, right, of our democracy together to make a difference. So I have Culver City, I have South Central, I have parts of Skid Row, I have Mar Vista, and some parts of Santa Monica, a few blocks of Santa Monica in this district. And though diverse, in running for my election, in sitting down and talking with hundreds of constituents from all walks of life, some who were organized in vibrant coalitions, others who, are part of Democratic clubs and bloc clubs, they all want good for their communities. They want nice things. They believe that everyone in our communities can have them. They believe that it is the state legislature's responsibility to build policies that create the opportunities. And when I say, I call it an equity toolkit, right? That It could be education. It could be housing. It could be criminal justice reform. It could be access to protection on the job. That our job is to build the toolbox, and whatever it is that a resident of the 28th District needs, they can reach in, pull that out, and use it to be able to move for higher ground, to seek the good things, the nice things that everyone deserves. I am a fan of Heather McGhee and her work, and my district represents, I think, some of the destructive ways in which public policy has created such an uneven playing field, such an inequitable playing field, that unevenness has just created overall instability for our entire district. And so what the 28th District residents have said to me is that we've got to begin to put out those fires that are creating that instability. And once we can do that, then we can begin to really transform our community. So when we are looking at the ways in which the prison industrial complex is extracting people and extracting resources out of our communities, what does it mean to say, well, let's turn that system around and let's make this system about importing skills, importing opportunity, so that when folks come out of this rehabilitative process, they're stepping back into the community as contributors. Right? So it's taking an extractive system and turning it into a system that can import opportunity, and starting with the most vulnerable. Across my district, those are the kinds of things that my constituents are saying we need to do. They're saying we need to protect workers. We had a wonderful stakeholder meeting about the 16 bills that we're moving, and they shared some of the bills that they want to see move in the next cycle, because we didn't have enough time to do that interrogation. So we talked about protecting civil rights and expanding them locally. We talked about protecting workers in the workplace, ensuring women have an opportunity to work, but not to be reprimanded or to somehow be set back because they had to care for their children. We want to make sure that there's an equal playing field. So these are the ways in which I say I have one of the most richest and diverse district, because though we're different, we believe and have a common vision for elevating the 28th, which is a message that we're saying we're going to elevate the 28th in these next 4 years.
In learning about you and exploring the humanity of Lola Smallwood-Cuevas, I am realizing that many of your policies that you have been working on through your career and the policies that you're looking at here in the legislature were very much informed by your own personal life. So let's talk about you, your career, but also your journey personally as well. Being the daughter of a single mom that you have talked about, a home care worker who worked 2 jobs and put herself through school. You have said before that you didn't get to see her very often because she was always at work, and that is one of the issues that you've focused on, is allowing people to have jobs where they can still have a family experience, and this has come into play in your own career. So talk about your life and that experience you had with that single mom and what you learned from her.
I'm so grateful for my life experience. My mother worked extremely hard, and she displayed her love for me in the level of work that she took on to be able to keep a roof over my head and food on our table. I saw also that she had to make these choices between livelihood and parenthood. She couldn't be at every parent-teacher meeting. She couldn't be at every sporting event. She couldn't be at every Girl Scout and Brownie. I mean, those are things that, you know, I had a big mama, my grandmother, who took me here, and a neighbor who picked me up and took me there. They called it Latchkey. I just knew it as a beloved community that cared for me, and my mother was blessed to have it. And what it taught me growing up is that these are choices that families shouldn't have to make. And as I grew up, I realized there were families that didn't have to make those kinds of choices. And, you know, because my mother and I, in some ways, we grew up together, I got to see what it meant for her to work those 2 jobs and to put herself through nursing school and then to join the Navy and to eventually end up in California. That's how I got here. You know, we were in Newark, New Jersey, which is a scrappy town outside of New York City. And, you know, she worked hard and joined the Navy, and that's how we ended up first in Oakland, California, and later in Los Angeles. But I say that to say that good job changed our lives, right? We went from living in co-op housing to my mother owning her own home. I saw that in my life. So I went to school to tell stories. I was a journalist.
Yes. A lot of people don't know that you were a journalist
to tell
at
stories,
one point, right out of college.
Like my mother, right? Because I felt like her story was important, and the community I came from, I didn't learn about those stories when I was in journalism school. So I wanted to be part of the public journalism movement. Unfortunately, the industry was collapsing at that time, but I held those stories with me, and when the industry collapsed, I also found out that I had a union, that I was in a union, and we were able to fight for those jobs. And so it was in my adult life that those two experiences really collided and said that we have the opportunity to create and fight for good jobs, like those jobs that my mother was eventually on her own, standing by herself, had to acquire. How can we actually create and prioritize policies and practice change that allow particularly those most vulnerable communities to have access to that transformative, generational transformation that will make a difference? Coming here to the state Senate and looking deeply at the budgets from this vantage point and looking at all of the suffering and all of the challenge that we have in terms of building budgets that have to provide billions of dollars to house people, billions of dollars to make sure that people are fed, billions of dollars to make sure that folks have adequate health care. When the root causes, why, is because of poverty, because we don't have those jobs in mass. When we had the greatest generation, we did, right? We had those jobs that were able to sustain whole neighborhoods, whole communities where we made things and we manufactured things. And now that shifted into an at-will, casual, maybe you have benefits, but most likely not, and you will be paid a low wage. Now we have on the other end this tremendous instability and subsidy that all of us have to hold. So from my lived experience, from my experience in union and organizing, I truly believe that we have to prioritize and build a work movement, going back to the old WPA, where as we are building these transformational policies around climate and around housing, that alongside of it must be a campaign for good jobs. And how are we going to secure those good jobs? Workforce development programs that actually are about place and train, not just training, but place and train, so that we can move folks to higher ground, into an opportunity. I know that there are communities, particularly Black and immigrant communities, and we talked about the history, we talked about the historic nature, we talked about the ways in which those communities have not had the same starting point and point of departure. But now these communities that have been really challenged with overlapping barriers are the new majority. We are the majority of California. It's not Black and brown, it is the majority of California. And if we want a community, a state that is going to be strong and that is going to advance and be able to have our best years ahead of us, which I truly believe we have, we've got to start with our new majority to be able to undo those 20th century burdens that have put these communities in such precarious positions. And we've got to build policies that put them on the pathway to sustainability, both sustaining our families, sustaining our communities, and sustaining our planet. I'm grateful to be in the state legislature in this moment, because I believe that these policies, this legislature is at the crossroads of that. And I firmly believe that as we look to the future of California, our best years are ahead.
In honor of your mother, I want to deep dive a little bit into your work through all of your levels of your career, the perspective and the focus on Black women, Black working moms. And you have shared in the past the history and perspective of how Black women have always worked as you had mentioned, as nurturers, as caregivers of their families, but also in these jobs and with non-existent wages and vulnerable to violence and genocide and disenfranchisement and having the disconnect from the families. Holly Mitchell told me one time, she says, Black women don't need a book on leaning in because we've been leaning in for 400 years.
That's right.
So I thought that was very profound.
That's right.
But at the same time, these Black women have historically been at the forefront of being advocates, not only in their families but outside, for justice and workers' rights and this organizing prowess. So walk us through a little bit of the work that you have done to uplift women in the workplace and the economy and giving them that agency and that organizing labor leadership that not only benefits them and their families, but everybody in the workplace.
Well, I always say when you scratch a modern crisis, underneath it is a slave era. And the Black woman endured so much in slavery. She always had to work from sunup to sundown. She had to care for others and have enough to give to care and sustain her own family and her own children. She had the opportunity to navigate in and out of the house and the field to support our men who were also facing another form of violence and oppression. And so why Black women are the leaders in our communities is as much a part of that history as it is to the modern issues and roles that you mentioned earlier. So for me, I carry that tradition in my work. And in our communities, we see women who are leaders in their church, leaders in their workplace, leaders in their communities, and leaders in their home. Black women, we are breadwinners. We are usually the main wage earners. And there's a lot of reasons for that and a lot of ugly public policy reasons for that. You know, for example, you could not receive aid as a woman if your partner was in your home as part of the racism and the destruction of the Black family that started on the plantation and moved into Jim Crow and into our systems. So that means that the Black woman has always had to be the wage earner, and why she is often and is the poorest of all groups, because unlike other households and even with immigrant women who really earn the least on the dollar when compared to white men, but Black women are in households where there are no other incomes. It is just her income that is supporting the family. So I understand that history, and I have understood it in my work and the women that I have organized alongside of who are able to connect the dots and to say that my justice as a worker means justice for my family, that it means justice for my community. It means that we have the safety nets that help to hold all of our families and allow us to be able to move to the next level. So when organizing the first Black Worker Center in California, which grew out of my union organizing work and then my labor education work. In labor education at the Labor Center, I got to see all sorts of creative innovations, particularly in the immigrant rights movement, where community and labor partnerships were being formed around these community centers that really centered work. And we looked at this model of Black Worker Centers, and there were dozens of women who helped me build that model. I am the co-founder of that work because so many women stepped in, and men, to make sure that we had California's Black Worker Center that brought the intersections of the Black woman experience, of the Black community experience, of the Black worker experience, and said that all of these things are interconnected, and that fighting for a strong wage, fighting for benefits, fighting for access to quality jobs, and fighting for dignity and inclusion of Black workers where it matters the most in the economy is a game changer for our community. So we help to build that center, really understanding the intersectional realities of the lives of Black women.
And that center is expanded,
together.
Right? I mean, it's all over the country
It
now,
has
right?
now. There are 17 centers across the country recognized by President Obama, doing phenomenal work to bring those intersections together, but most importantly, to build a space where communities can learn together, can strategize together, and build bottom-up strategies strategies and solutions, both from the policy level, but also from the corporate practice change level. And I think my space and time here is an evolution of that movement. And I say that I come out of that experience, but I also understand the power of business. And I respect those businesses that have collective bargaining, that give workers voice and space. When I talk about the battle of ideas and the struggle to the fix, that's happening in businesses across this nation. And to me, those are the real blue chip. We need to invest in those businesses that are investing in workers, because we are all part of what I believe is a grand partnership. Sales tax, income tax, and business tax is what builds our base. And so we have to invest in the worker. They are the consumer. We have to invest in the worker. They produce that income tax we have, and I'm talking at scale, that we need. And we have to invest in businesses that allow our communities to do that. We're in partnership together. We've got to see ourselves as partners and make sure that we all have a seat at that table. So when I think about the work that I've done in the community, organizing, building collaborations and partnerships and coalitions, I am bringing that approach and that work to the California State Senate.
Is your mom still with us?
She is. My mother she's an amazing woman, and she's not political in any way, but she's now retired, and we stay very close, because even in retirement, after all that work, it's still a struggle. But she's like, you're there fighting for me. You're there fighting for the community. You know where you come from. You know who your people are. And every day I get a get well box. If I'm sounding scratchy, I get texts with hearts and love. I got a text thread this morning from my family, and it means so much. One thing that she taught me, and this is, I think, is always remarkable, just talking about the ways that we're interconnected, and how she and others also shared this experience. And I'm glad we're talking about the Black experience, because I think it's at the root of so much that we are addressing as a broader democracy. And in the fields, when you're picking tobacco or you're picking cotton, sometimes, right, folks would get these cuts on their hands, and there wasn't medical care, and you could have an untreated cut that could turn into gangrene. And that gangrene will take your finger, and if you don't treat it, it will take your whole hand. And I will never forget that story, because it's a reminder for me that we're in this together, and whatever is happening in the Black community, the level of suffering, the unemployment, the barriers, the microaggressions, the housing crisis, the education crisis, it never stays there. It eventually, the whole body will succumb to it. And we've seen it with predatory lending. We see it with bad schools that are not getting the investment that they need. We see that in our healthcare system. We see that in the economy in terms of the access to good jobs and how many of our communities are suffering. And so it is important for us to understand that. And when we allow institutional racism and 20th century themes to continue, eventually we will all succumb to it if we aren't intentional about changing those practices and those policies. And so I carry that lesson from my mother with me. I carry that lesson from so many in my community who have taught that lesson of starting with communities most vulnerable and making sure that we arrest those conditions as a way of ensuring that our whole democracy is healthy and vibrant and able to step into the future in the way that we need to.
You have called this work that you do spiritual work. And you have said that you came to it knowing that this society can be a society where we can have strong jobs and strong families. And obviously, it sounds like those that lift you up, that provide you the humanity to continue, are your mom and your communities. And you come into this session and what could be the next 12 years with that spiritual positivity doing this work. Is that how you look at it?
That's how I look at it. And the work is in the results. What makes me feel elated and fills my gas tank up is when we win. And when we stick together, we win. The 28th is a dynamic coalition. This campaign to elect Lola Smallwood-Cuevas to the 28th district, when we stick together, we can win it all. We can win it all. So I am excited, and that's my spiritual, that is my gospel. That is the soul force that I come from. And I know that it is possible because I've lived it in my own experience in workers coming together and these kinds of coalitions coming together and transforming conditions. I've seen it in my cultural and historical tradition of transformative change in our country by those most impacted who brought allies and built global coalitions for change. So why wouldn't I expect the same out of the work that I'm doing? And I'm excited for this challenge. I'm excited for the work ahead. And most of all, I'm excited for us to win together the change that we know our communities need and surely deserve.
Thank you so much.
Thank
with
you.
all respect and admiration for sharing so candidly, talking to us about your mom and the work that you have done and the communities that you work in and the work you're doing here. Thank you for your time.
Thank
I
you
look
so
forward
much,
to having you
Brian.
back. You always have a home here if there's any issues you want to come share with.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And thank you for this show and opportunity.
My pleasure. Lola Smallwood-Cuevas, the freshman state senator from Los Angeles, representing the 28th Senate District in LA County. And that is a wrap for this edition of Then There's California. We are a production of the California State Senate Democratic Caucus with technical assistance and production support from Martin Ashley, Bob Brulte, Brian Shadden, John Roman, Ann DeGrazia, McLeana Woods, Lisa Murphy, and the graphic design artistry of Tim Davis. From the state capitol in Sacramento, I'm Brian Green. Thank you for listening to Then There's California.